So, welcome to the show, the Right Honourable Duncan Webb. Hello, how are you?
Hello. I'm not dressed to be a right honourable tonight.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I've had a hard day at the office, and I got home, and it's 9 o'clock at night, so I'm just here in my comfies.
Nice.
I mean, so am I. I got my pajama pants on, man. We good.
Oh, good on you.
No, it's a good Friday for it. Are you back in? Do you spend most of the day in Christchurch, or are you up in Wellington?
Yeah, no, all day here in Christchurch. Got back on Thursday night after pretty, as you say, pretty busy week.
I can imagine. Did you enjoy the nice 24 degrees I think we had here today?
Oh, it felt warm, eh? I went for a bit of a walk over lunchtime, and it was really nice, blue skies, and I understand Wellington, it was raining.
Yeah, nah, it was a miserable day here. I'm very jealous.
Oh, you got the best of it then, obviously. Wonderful. Well, Treaty Principles Bill. The Select Committee has handed in their report. Before we get into that, I just need to clarify. What was your technical position? Because I'm trying to say you were the subcommittee chair, or you're chair of the subcommittee, and I was trying to figure it out.
Well, there's actually quite a funny story there. So we split into two committees, right? Because there's so many submissions, we wanted to kind of maximise the amount of submissions that got an oral hearing. And so as we were doing that, James Meagher, who's the chair of the committee, said, well, I'll chair one, which you kind of expect. And then he pointed to Jamie Arbuckle and said, why don't, Jamie Arbuckle, who's the deputy chair, can chair the other one. And I piped up and said, well, hang on, why don't we have an opposition member chair it? And Jamie Arbuckle, bless his heart, sort of looked and said, well, I don't really care. And so I kind of accidentally got voted to be the chair of one of the subcommittees hearing those submissions, which of course meant 30 odd hours of listening to those submissions. But there were some crackers in there, I must say. Really good, amazing. And can I just say one other thing? Yeah. Because there's been all this furore around the submissions that kind of didn't get onto the record. And one of the things I went and did, because there was all these hard copy submissions that we hadn't seen, I went into the room where they were stored. Now, I wasn't going to read them all because there was thousands and thousands of them, but I went through and opened up the boxes and kind of put through and flicked through them. And it was just phenomenal, the amount of work that there was all these there's some a whole lot in this kind of shaky handwriting from old people who were like, I'm 84 and I just want to say this bill is a terrible thing. And then there was some done with bloody coloured pencils from intermediate kids and just the whole raft. And it was actually quite an amazing experience because, well, you probably don't, but a handwritten letter, it's something special. It carries a special weight. And so these documents, which were particularly the ones that had been handwritten, were actually quite moving, and it made me take the job much more seriously in a sense. And that's why I kind of went hard on we need everything on the record, because it would be such a travesty, whoever they are, whatever they say, for them just to be like, oh yeah, thanks very much, we haven't got time for those, we might tack them onto some corner of the website later on.
Absolutely.
So was it did you find those early, or did you sort of find them a bit later?
No.
And be like, oh crap, we lost them. Or was it just they were sitting there in a back room?
They were never lost, but I mean, I feel for the clerks, right? So you got these people who are not political, and a bit of a shout out to them actually. They're public servants. They're serving Parliament, and they kind of really value the concept of Parliament as the centre of our democracy. And they have to kind of deal with all of us, kids fighting in the playground, so to speak, and be really measured and careful about it and not take sides. But they have been breaking their backs trying to get through as many submissions as they can, organising hundreds of people at short notice to come on and do these submissions. So, just a shout out to those clerks. They don't get a lot of glory, nor do they want it. But they are the oil that makes the machine, work.
Yeah. No. So they were so who was actually reading? Were you personally reading the submissions, or were you just listening to the oral ones?
Well, this is the whole big point, right? That yes, I could read a lot of the submissions. So just to kind of wind the whole thing back a bit, we get over 300,000 submissions. No single human can read all those. So they were essentially sent off to the Ministry of Justice, who also didn't have the resources to So they actually subcontracted a policy firm, to go through and read. And I asked the question, is an actual human going to read all of these submissions, or is there some computer doing it? And the answer I got was no, every submission will be read by a human. So that's a pretty enormous task. That went away, and that's how we get the departmental report, which you can get on the Parliament website. That's the one that kind of says, here's what the submissions are, here's what they said, and that was fed into us. In terms of members, we can see submissions once the clerk says that they're properly made. And so there's only about 100 and something thousand of them that have so far been tabled by the clerk, saying, yeah, they're in order, they haven't got swear words, they're not calling anyone racist, they're not defaming anyone, you can go on and read those. So we reported back after being able to see only a fraction of the submissions. I forget the exact number, but I think it's something like 20,000 hard copy submissions, and hundreds of thousands of online submissions. The other thing is there's boxes, like there's 12 boxes, I don't like to say it, especially not on this platform, but there's 12 boxes of Hobson pledge submissions, right?
Yes.
Now, they're all pretty similar. They're not identical, but they're all pretty similar. So, you kind of read one or two or five and you got the gist. And there's also a box of several hundred Green Party submissions and Toitu to treaty submissions. So and they're all kind of sort of postcards or whatever. But the ones that really got me were the genuine, unique submissions that someone had sat down either with a pen and paper or in front of their laptop and actually just typed out and posted put in an envelope, or in many cases, because of the debacle around the submission process, if you remember it, turned up to Parliament and handed it across the desk.
Yes.
Which is pretty cool. I know I spent way too long on mine when I probably could have cut half of it, but I was like, no, if I'm going to do a submission about something that's this important, I'm going to write it. And I'm sure I wrote like a family history essay, but it was all relevant and important stuff to put in there. Yeah,
but I mean, in some ways I didn't, because I had a bit to do with the Labour view that's in the Select Committee report. And a lot of the submissions, I'm a former law professor, so I appreciated the kind of constitutional law ones. But a lot of people came along and told their family history, and I'm not sure that really gets captured in the Select Committee report itself, that there's all these kind of academic and scholarly reasons why this is a piece of shit, but there's also these quite different reasons, which are, well, this is who I am, and this is where I come from, and this is my relationship with the treaty, and this is so disrespectful to all of what I am and this stands for. It's a quite different argument, and I think it's one that it's really hard to capture.
Absolutely.
Easier to say than right,
Yeah. I mean, I felt kind of silly because I was like, oh, I'm not an academic and I don't really know this, but this is about the only point of view I can come from. So that's pretty much summed up what my submission was. But I was like, no, I'm proud of that.
Well, there's some that stand out, right? Marilyn Waring, who you might know, former National Party MP who, went head to head with Robert Muldoon back in the day, and then has done some amazing work around women's work and the value of women's work and things like that, a real trailblazer. She came in and sat down and said, well, here, look, I just want to tell you my story. I grew up in, the Waikato, and in a very wealthy family from farming stock. And then she kind of talks about the moment she realized that her farm was the ancestral lands of the Māori who were living in poverty just down the road. And her kind of, road to Damascus moment where she realized that there was a relationship of injustice there that needed redressing somehow, and that the treaty had a part to play. And, so that was her personal story. And then for her to say, and now you're telling me that this is about, nothing more than them not having any extra rights, which is kind of the ACT Party mantra, right? It's like, well, hang on, given that history, that narrative, that whakapapa, how could you possibly say that? It's just amazing.
Oh,
and look, what a great job I've got. What fantastic. What a moment to be there listening and, being able to contribute.
I have a question on the oral submissions. So one of the things that came out was that in the report that you attempted to move the committee to not hear any oral submissions. I'm sure you have good reasons for it, but why was it?
No, look, we hate the bill, right? We really don't like the bill, and we didn't want my first motion, which are all recorded in the Select Committee report. My first motion was, let's just turn this around immediately. All of us around the table, except for one ACT member, know what's going to happen to this bill. Why would we put New Zealand to the expense and the distress of this process, right? So let's just turn it around, send it straight back to Parliament in 3 days, and say we don't like it. So that was my first my first motion. And the second one was, is again, right, let's kind of lance the boil, get it out of the way as quickly as possible, and send it straight back without any oral submissions, because we've got 300,000 written ones. We know what we've got, Now, to be fair, that was unlikely to get acceptance around the table, and it panned out as was expected. It was rejected. But what really frustrated me, and I really want to stress this, was that once we agreed to enter into a fully fledged submissions process, the bill was reported back today, and that's about 40 days before it was due. Now, and there are hundreds of thousands of submissions which are not yet on the record. So they didn't. It's like, a judge making a decision without hearing all the evidence. Not all the evidence was before us. Now, we know the way the wind was blowing, right? But the fact of the matter is, it was an incredibly poor process. It was rushed, and it's pretty. I was actually really upset. People were like patting me on the back and saying, "Good work you're doing on the Treaty Principles Bill." But on Thursday, when these decisions were made, I was actually quite sad, because I just looked at the way it was the National Party were treating the process, and it was just mercenary. They just wanted to kind of slide it under the carpet, get it passed. They want it out of the way and not to kind of intersect with the budget week. They don't want to confuse that, and it's it's just a bad process. But look, we've got to where we are. We know what's going to happen next. The
we hope.
National Party will vote. Well, Jesus, just imagine. But we're pretty confident it's going to get voted down, and that'll be the end of it. So and I kind of look forward to that. Put it to rest.
Yeah, it's just a shame that we're going to have to waste so much money before that happens.
Yes, unfortunately.
Look, this is so expensive.
Yeah.
Both within Parliament, where it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the process as a whole, all the policy development, the Ministry of Justice, that's millions of dollars. And look, I'm not sure you can value it, but there's over 300,000 people who turned their minds to this. So there's, there is hundreds of thousands of hours of people's time consumed in an evil and divisive piece of legislation.
Yeah. Well, the results are not evil or divisive, I would say. So the people that haven't seen it, 5 weeks, which is good work for 5 weeks. 300,000 or over 300,000 submissions, 80 hours of oral submissions from 529 people, which I'm assuming some of those were representing groups, which ended in a 45-page report with 12 themes raised by opponents and 4 themes by supporters, which kind of speaks to that narrative of, I think Chewie was saying it last night, of the opponent side had a lot to say, and it was almost based around facts and a lot of evidence, and it was very academic. And then the supporter side was very vibes, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
And you can see that here with the difference between those two. I guess 2 lists, really.
Yeah, is that the Radio New Zealand article there?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's a good one, actually. So if people want a kind of quick skim of what the report says, it's actually not a bad place to start.
No, it's great. Do you have anything to say on the themes? Because they're sort of what most of us would expect, but is there anything that was quite surprising for you to come out of this?
Well, not after all those submissions, right? Nothing surprises me anymore. There was some differing. I think what was interesting, the National Party didn't have much to say. They just want this to go away, and so it's not surprising they didn't have a real view. The Māori Party view is what you'd expect. They take the view that Māori are sovereign and that they're not. So the treaty essentially is retained their own sovereignty, and that this is therefore an attack on sovereign rights. It's a view which is at odds with kind of real world New Zealand, if you know what I mean, because anyone who's living in New Zealand is subject to the New Zealand government. So whilst I think the argument that goes backwards and forwards about whether any particular iwi ceded sovereignty in the treaty is a real argument, that's not the only way governments get sovereignty, right? Over the course of years in government, and it kind of can accumulate. So that's interesting that they're actually putting on paper their view, which is that Māori have some sort of sovereignty which is quite separate from kind of the New Zealand government. And so there you go. That's what you get with the Māori Party. The Greens and the Labour Party views were, relatively similar in many ways. I really wanted to make sure that the Labour Party put down a really thoughtful view, which captured some of the fantastic submissions that were made. And one of the things I really wanted to do was not to kind of duck and weave, but to confront head on the kind of equality argument. The argument that Māori get special privileges because they make these claims under the treaty, and they're more privileged than Pākehā or non-Māori New Zealanders. And I think it was really important to do that. And I guess there's a few ways to. Well, there's a whole lot of reasons that you can kind of pan out, and it might be worth just touching on some of them. And probably the first one is there's actually no real evidence. Just one. I think it was a farmer came along and said, under the Resource Management Act, Māori can stop everything. And then we had local bodies, and so we'd ask them, okay, what is the rights that Māori have under the Resource Management Act that no one else has? And they were pretty upfront and said, well, nothing. They get to be consulted just like everyone else does, but they've got no special veto right or anything. But sure, they're taking into consideration, and their cultural rights, in the local environment are taken into account, but they get some special rights. So the first thing is, well, it doesn't actually work that way. And I guess the second point was this, that because a lot of people are like, well, what about whānau ora or the Māori Health Authority, things like that. And it's true that they deliver services in a particular way. But one of the really interesting things about those kinds of services is that it's about the way the services are delivered, not actually who they're delivered to. So, I went and I was at a Pride event the other day, and I got a Hep C test, right? Now that was delivered in a very rainbow-friendly environment. It was as gay as you can get, right? But I was a straight white guy, and I was more than welcome to use that rainbow-friendly service. Now, if we think about Māori services in that way as well, they're Māori-friendly so that they deliver services more effectively to Māori. They're not exclusively for Māori. And I guess that brings me to the third point about kind of the equal rights thing. If you say that services should be provided in, only in English, or only in a model which is familiar to kind of our Western heritage, then all you're doing is you're saying we're a monocultural society. It's not preferring someone else to recognize that they have a different cultural tradition which can be respected with tikanga, te ao Māori, and so on. So difference is not inequality, and that's fundamentally the flaw of the ACT Party's argument, that they say they're treated differently, or they can be treated differently, therefore that is inequality. That's actually just a flawed argument, because difference and inequality are two quite different things.
Yeah.
Anyway, there you go. Slight rant, but I'm doing a bit of a sales job, but I really think it's worth a read if you're really interested in this stuff. If you've got a passion for the treaty, that document, the Select Committee report, is actually of significance in terms of recording not only what happened, but where we are right now. in terms of the treaty. And so, I'd encourage people to go and have a look.
I'm just going to put the link into the chat there. I think that's, before Magenta, you jump in, I think that's what I got out of the oral submissions, and I'm kind of glad that it got vetoed, that the oral submissions did go through, because I think there's a lot that came out of that because it's audio video, right? It's much easier for people to consume, and I think there was so much that came out of that was good to consume for a lot of us. It was easy access, and I think I actually learned a lot from those submissions. So part of me is like, I know it would have killed the bill sooner if we didn't do it, but I recognize it actually was a great thing to do.
Oh, no, I kind of agree with you as well, right? The way it turned out, the world we ended up with was one where there were a whole lot of fantastic submissions, and that's certainly a good thing.
Yeah. Magenta, have you got anything to ask?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I agree with most of what you said in the second and the third point, but that first point about Te Pāti Māori, to be honest, I'm going to push back a bit on this, and you kind of framed it as if they want that tino rangatiratanga is the equivalent of having separated, like, governing things, but it's more to do with the fact that constitutionally we have never been set up in a way that has actually been how it was supposed to be from the beginning. So that's what they tend to kind of push. So I feel like it's a little unfair to frame it in the way that you've done.
No, look, I wasn't trying to frame, so really good conversation to have, right? I wasn't trying to frame what we understand by tino rangatiratanga, because I certainly have an understanding of how that has developed through the principles of the treaty, right? As giving as much autonomy and self-governance as is appropriate and possible to Māori, particularly in respect of things that are Māori, right? So I think we can agree on that. But my point, I guess, was the approach, and I'm trying to find it in the document itself, because as I read the Te Pāti Māori submission or the report, they actually essentially assert that they have more than simply that kind of tino rangatiratanga. That and I mean, if you look at the way they, and there's other things going on as well. If you look at the way they approach Parliament, they sort of sit both within it and outside of it. So if I can divert for a moment, if you look to the way that they are managing this privileges issue that's going on at the moment, they're saying, well, we don't really even recognise the authority of this Parliament to constrain our behaviour. We're not going to turn up to the committee. Now, I'm on that committee, so I can't talk too much about it. We're not going to turn up to the committee. We're going to have our own separate committee. So that kind of approach, saying we don't sit within it, we sit outside of it.
But there could be an argument to be made that they're kind of forced to do these things because in terms of our political framework, we're entirely a Westminster system that pretends to honor the treaty. So I think what a lot of that really speaks to is more the fact that from the beginning, we have never been set up in a political system that is co-governed, because had we had that, like you said, those submissions that had a lot of talking about whakapapa and how people's mana is enhanced by the treaty, those type of things would be captured if we had a political system that had included Māori tikanga from the start. And so I guess it just feels like a lot of times, while I don't actually even agree with everything Te Pāti Māori says or how they do it, I think that they are often pushed to it because we're getting close to 200 years on and we're still having the same conversations, but I don't think they're the conversations we should be having.
Yeah, I mean, I really was just trying to capture, because you asked me what the report was, and I just want to try and capture the flavour of Te Pāti Māori's view, and I think we've actually done that. I think this discussion we're having is actually.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't reduced or diminished in the kind of. I think the words that you used initially were a bit too reductive.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's always hard, isn't it, when you're kind of trying to capture it in a short frame?
No, I understand.
But the other thing to know, I think you make a really good point about Parliament being a Westminster Parliament, right? And whilst it's changed slightly. Fundamentally, it is very much based on the Westminster system. So it doesn't, and even things like, really strict rules about speaking and what you can say and how long you can speak for and things like that. It's quite different from what might, go on a marae or elsewhere. There's actually some work being done, and Adrian Rurafi, who used to be Speaker, he's actually leading it to say, well, what do we need to do to recognise the place of tikanga in Parliament? I think it's a really hard job that he's got ahead of him, but it's good to see that some progress, is being made in that place in particular, because you do know it's kind of a foreign place. I'm a lawyer. I turned up and I thought it was weird. For someone like Hana, who's young and very Māori, it's truly weird. So I get it. Yeah, we do need to do better.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing, is that I feel like the question shouldn't even be about these principles. It's maybe more the way that we're set up, because I mean, there's like, Hannah and them shouldn't even have to really go before this committee if we had set our system up to accommodate for the actual cultures that we were blending together. We could have, and I know like there's been Mātiki Mai and He Puapua, which have done a lot of great work. Like iwi have been doing work on this. It's just frustrating to see that those aren't the conversations that are elevated. It's bloody DS's stuff that just gets the conversation
Yeah.
all the year.
In this government, when we were in government, both as Labor and with Greens as well, in New Zealand First, we were making progress, and I know that many people thought it wasn't fast enough, and a whole lot of other people thought it was kind of radical, right? But this government, we just saw yesterday, I think it was, yes, it was yesterday, the repeal of 7AA of the Oranga Tamariki Act, right? So that placing whakapapa at the centre of questions and tikanga, in terms of the welfare of Māori kids. Now, I mean, where does that even come from? I mean, it's just beggars belief, right? And now they're going through and kind of identifying treaty clauses and eliminating them. It's just, and it's a real backward step, more than a step. It's a real lurch.
It's funny that you bring that up, because that was kind of the second thing, seeing as you're here to talk about, was the fact that the treaty is still under attack, and a lot of these things are being repealed, like you say, the RMA, 7AA from Oranga Tamariki, and even teachers, there's a headline here, teachers are worried about draft curriculum pushing Treaty of Waitangi out. So I know that this was kind of the big bad guy, was the Treaty Principles Bill, but at the same time, people were saying, hey, this isn't the only one. There are also things happening with all of these other bills that they're trying to strip Te Tiriti from. So even if this gets voted down or doesn't make it any further, we've still got other things that might do it. And we are seeing that RMA, that kind of order, those things. So what do we, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, you got RMA, the new bill that's going to come through, and I think you're right. It's, we had a massive hikoi, right, on the Treaty Principles Bill, but there is a danger that this is something of a distraction, because the outcome of this was always kind of certain, and we've got to be really careful that we don't think, oh, well, once we kick this for touch, we've kind of won, because we haven't at all. This government, the fact of the matter is that this government, particularly whilst it's got the ACT Party in it, but I absolutely want to hold the National Party to account, because they cannot say it's the ACT Party's fault. It's just the coalition agreement. They absolutely are doing this. And if the treaty was at all valued by them, they would never have made this deal with the devil. So we need to point the finger at them, and people who vote National need to accept that their party is complicit in undermining the treaty. So, and we absolutely need to make sure that just, the little single section of the Oranga Tamariki Act and the Resource Management Act and then the Conservation Act and all of those other acts, which actually are really important, that we don't sort of let it be eroded an inch at a time.
Yeah. No, I feel like there's some scary stuff happening out there. There was a few questions in the chat. Do you mind answering a few of those?
Yeah, let's see how we go, eh?
We have friend of the show, Paul, the other one. Interested to know what the process was for selecting. Oh, who did the oral submissions? Yeah, because it was 1,600 people opted to put their hands up, basically to do oral
Was it
submission.
1,600 or 16,000? It was lots. I think
it was 16,000, was it? Oh, geez, that's even.
I think it was. Yeah, well, I couldn't.
Yeah, it was in the thousands, definitely.
Sorry, 16,000 is probably the number I was thinking of.
Really good question, Paul. And one of the things that if you go to the departmental report, you'll see that a good chunk, like there's 10% of the people actually supported the bill. And the reason for that is that we had a strange kind of process that we just, because there's no real way to do it, we just said, okay, each party, of which there are 6, can choose equal numbers of submitters. So ACT Party chose a 6 of the submitters, National chose a 6, New Zealand First chose a 6, Labour, Greens, Te Pāti Māori a 6 each as well. So it got a broad spread of views, and it did mean that, you know, for example, we really wanted to make sure workers' voices were heard, and so we made sure that the unions were heard. And you know, you can imagine, you know, I had the youth council from Christchurch City, because I was like, well, I know the youth council, they're going to have something to say. I want to make sure they get heard. So you could go through and make sure, and of course, you know, bounce off my own colleagues in the Labour Party and say, have you got someone who's made a submission who you really think deserves a slot? Because they're precious things. So essentially that's how we did it. We kind of recognised that there was no perfect way to do it. So it was kind of just a pragmatic way so that it was relatively fair. One of the other ways to do it would be lot, and that's been done before. I think it was done on, an abortion bill, but it ended up with, you know, people were not necessarily high quality submitters. We also wanted to make sure that some of the, you know, really thoughtful people in New Zealand, whether they're former politicians like Jenny Shipley even came along and gave a submission, or academics, you know, or iwi leaders, the iwi chairs forum, you know, those people. We want to make sure we got all of those really, you know, important voices to make sure. So it was, I think at the end of the day, it was pretty representative.
Yeah. No, I think you did get a good range of people. I really appreciated. It was very obvious it was handpicked, but at the same time, I appreciated that in a way.
Yeah,
because you did get a range of voices that were important, right?
It was funny because I certainly named everyone of mine, but some of the other parties we sort of named some and then said, and just picked some random ones for the rest of them. So there were some in there, which, you know, and you know, I don't know if you saw the guy who zoomed in from Mitre 10, the hardware section, which was quite funny. I suspect he was one of the randoms, but it was quite funny.
That is funny. That is funny.
Yeah.
There's another question from Kira, but it's a little bit off topic. So before we get to that, Magenta, did you have anything else that you wanted to chat about?
I guess
related to the treaty principles.
Yeah, I guess from here on in, like, as opposition party like members, what can you guys actually like do to keep, I guess, making sure that this doesn't go through?
Yeah, well, obviously, this will probably be voted on next week. The treaty principles bill will probably be voted on next week. So we've got to make sure that, you know, I mean, we are in opposition. By definition, we don't get to call the shots, right? So I guess what we need to do is, you know, with our progressive friends, we need to win the next election. Honestly, that is the answer. And to do that, you know, we as the Labour Party have to present to, you know, and we are a party that's nearer the centre than our progressive colleagues. So we have to present as a responsible party with a real plan to govern New Zealand that addresses the things that matter just to really ordinary New Zealanders, right? Those, you know, people who get up and go to work and, you know, worry about the cost of the diesel in their ute and all of that sort of stuff. And, you know, so we've got policy processes going on, and we've kind of pitched. We've already pitched what we think is going to be the key issues. It's going to be jobs, because unemployment is shit. It's going to be the health, because our health system is just really creaking under the strain, and there isn't enough money for it. And it's going to be houses and homes, right? And not just everyone, not just first home buyers, right? It's homes for everyone. The homelessness, the rise in homelessness. New Zealanders are actually quite compassionate. They don't sit at home and think, well, I've got a house, I don't care if someone's on the street. They actually do. But also just, good homes for everyone, whether it's rental or whether it's purchasing or whether it's, in a retirement village, whatever it is. We've got to make sure everyone's got a good, safe, secure, warm house.
I did note, and Magenta has put it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on tax then, as that wasn't mentioned?
Tax, work less, tax, wealth more. Yeah, look, I'm not going to announce the Labor Party's tax policy.
I didn't ask you to. I was just asking your personal opinions on tax.
Do you like
Yeah,
it?
no, look, I agree. I agree, and I agree with all of my colleagues, but David Parker, when he was Minister for Revenue, did the work on it, did the actual study that looked at where the tax burden falls. And he identified that we don't tax assets enough, that there's a group of people out there who make money, increase their wealth on the basis of assets they own. And they get this thousands or millions of dollars a year, and because it's a capital increase, it goes untaxed, and that makes no sense. And of course, if you don't tax it, it grows more, and that makes the inequality issue greater. Now, I think if we're going to go to the next election with a tax on capital of some sort, whether it's, and I think, the debate has always been wealth tax, capital gains tax, and we have to do that in a way which is really understandable and acceptable to New Zealanders, that they get it, and they understand why, because people, people maybe don't love paying tax, but they get it. They get that our police are paid by our taxes, our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, our roads, all of those things which we kind of jump up and down when it doesn't work and complain about potholes, or whatever it is. We need a tax base to do it. And I think they also, we do have a real sense of fairness. And the idea that there's some people, certainly the super wealthy, which was David Parker's study, who pay about 9% of the increase in their wealth every year in tax, whereas someone on $70,000 or the average wage pays about 25 or 27% of their income in tax. It's like, how is that fair? So that is something we need to address. And there's wider arguments about, tax on capital and where we put our money, and the fact that we put too much money into houses and all sorts of other stuff. But yeah, so big tax changes are hard to do, right? I mean, when this government got in, we had a kind of we had a tax on second homes called the Bright Line test, right? So that was if you bought a house, and when we finished it was if you sold it within 10 years and it was not your family home, then you paid tax on the increase in value of the home. So, that was specifically aimed at cooling down the house market and stopping people making money flipping, just trading in houses. The National Party got in, did away with it immediately. And of course, the other thing that they did away with immediately was the tax break for landlords on interest payments. So they borrow a whole lot of money. They borrow, $1 million. They pay $70,000 in interest on it a year. They get a tax write-off for that $70,000. It makes the money cheaper. It makes it cheaper to be a landlord than a first home buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And that can't be right. So, and that was like, Nicola Willis talks about deficits and so on, and how tough, apparently we made it for her. She made it tough for herself with a $3 billion tax break by giving landlords interest, tax deductions for interest. So, there you go.
Very
The
true.
tax debate is one that we like to have quite often. I mean, you saw that we have a T-shirt about it.
Yeah.
I suppose the thing that a lot of people, and I don't know if you've sort of seen this around, but a lot of people worry that because you're right, the tax conversation it gets everyone's heckles up. They get really scared about it because it's the mum and pops who have perhaps got a batch or something they can afford and generational wealth, that sort of thing, and they think, oh, they're coming for my money. I've got $1 million. They're coming for me.
Yeah.
How in these, you're not saying what the tax policy is, but how will you communicate that it's not them that the tax is going to go after? It's the tens of millionaires, it's the hundreds of millionaires who do exist, but that's the people we want to try and get. It's the property flippers, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, look, and one of the challenges with tax policy is that people don't only object to taxing them in their current situation, they object to a proposal which taxes them in their hoped future situation, right? Now, if everyone wants to be a millionaire, multi-millionaire, then a tax that says, well, if you make it there, we're going to tax you, people find that hard, and so it is a real challenge to persuade people. And I think that, when we come to implement our tax policy, you're right, we've got to communicate it really clearly. I think it's a wee bit early to say how you're going to do that, because I can't explain how to sell something that hasn't been decided on yet. And it hasn't been decided. I just want to be clear about that. It's not like it's a secret, it just hasn't been decided yet.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I think that's just the question that all of us are scared about, because I think that's the thing that's going to decide the taxes. It's going to be the election of tax, as people say, but it's really how do you communicate that? And we're all a bit like, is Labor going to do it correctly? Are we going to get there? Are we going to get people on board with this idea of new tax policy, or is it going to freak everyone out?
One of the things, you guys are important, right? Because one of the things, we can't persuade the nation by ourselves. And one of the challenges for the left is that our voices are not amplified in quite the same way sometimes as the voices of the right, because they have money and networks. And so we've really got to work on making sure that our allies who have voices, understand what we're trying to say, understand kind of how we're trying to frame it, and are equipped to also amplify that story, tell it as well, and tell it in your own way, but one which kind of is really well informed. So we've got a job ahead of us, sure.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I don't envy you guys. It's going to be an interesting 2 years leading up to the year and a half almost really now at this point. Magenta, did you have anything before we let Duncan go and enjoy his Friday night?
I think we had one last question that you're saving for the end.
Oh,
from
yes.
the super chats. So
I can throw that one up. It was Kiwi Bear. So we'll throw this very, very another hard question for you. What are your thoughts around what Tamitha said about police speed patrols and some people, homeless folk and Māori, feeling unsafe? This was a big topic this week amongst
yeah,
some
sure.
other things.
And look, first of all, I
Last week.
think if what Tamitha was seeking to communicate was that there are some people out there who are marginalised and who don't feel the police are on their side all the time, then she's right. But I do think, Tamitha has sat next to me at the Select Committee. I've got a lot of time for her, but I don't think she was accurate when she said most people, feel less safe around the police. This government, might be telling the police how to do their job and, putting foot patrols and so on and so forth. But I do think most people, particularly when you've got a national government who's stirring the pot on law and order and crime and justice, I think most people do feel safer when they know that the police are available or nearby or visible or whatever. And I mean, So look, I get the sentiment, and I do think there's a conversation to be had around, and the police themselves. Can I also say this? The police themselves know that this is the case because they have addressed the problem of systemic racism. They've identified it, they've put their finger on it and said, yes, we do have a problem, and they're seeking to improve the way they operate. So I think we just need to recognise that this is not the police force that I grew up with in this kind of 80s and 90s. This is a different kind of police force. It's much more diverse. It is much more representative of who New Zealand really is, but there is work to be done. And Tamitha has identified that, but I think she probably kind of didn't quite express it in a way that most New Zealanders connected with.
That's a fair point. I think we also had a discussion last week when it came out that we're like, actually, Tamitha's right. There is evidence here. Police know that there's evidence here that minorities do feel unsafe around police. But you're right. It's that communication of having it be heard that there are some people that feel unsafe and that we need to address it, as opposed to, I guess, everyone feels unsafe. I don't think that's what she said, though. She didn't say everyone feels unsafe. She definitely said there's a minority of people.
Did you guys see the news today? That they did exactly this, and they've got respondents at 31.5% no, which isn't a majority.
Yeah.
But that's because there is also a neutral line. Just wanted to say that did come out today.
No, that's good.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, can I just, as Justice spokesperson, that whole crime and justice is part of my gig as well. And I do find it really frustrating that, the National Party is kind of beating up on crime, and it actually creates fear where it might not have existed before. And if they create the narrative, then the news kind of follows. And whilst COVID totally skews all the figures, but if you look over the long term, violent crime has been trending down for years, which is great. In the work that's being done in family and domestic violence, that's good work. It's actually having some effect. There's still work to be done, but there isn't. It just simply was not true to say there was a crime wave. My real concern is that the response to that narrative has been increase sentences. So the Sentencing Act reform has just gone through, which basically tells judges what to do. So you can't look at a person and their personal circumstances and look at the circumstances of the victim and kind of do a really nuanced view. You just got to say, well, okay, here's the kind of tick box list of how much I can discount, and there's much less discretion. And then you've got 3 strikes, which is just a horrific piece of legislation, which will see people in jail. Now, I'm not saying they haven't committed offences. If they're a 3-striker, they're clearly, we've got some issues there. But again, it's not saying what is the best justice response to keep the community safe and to address the cause of offending. It's saying it's a 3rd strike, send them away for the maximum term of imprisonment, right? So, and the list goes on. So I'm just concerned about that there's this narrative here. And I guess in the face of a National Party that's leading the charge on that, I can see why, someone might rail against it and kind of swing entirely in the opposite direction. So important to take a really balanced approach. And the one thing, victims are really important. We do need to put them at the centre of any decision making around crime and justice. But at the same time, you don't actually keep victims safer in the long term simply by putting people in prison. You've got to address the causes of offending. And when you do that, it's both address the causes of offending before the offending, mental health, addiction, poverty, family dislocation. They're all kind of things that feed into offending. But also, if people do cross the line, at the moment we tend to just put them in prison and kind of pay lip service to the idea of rehabilitation. If people are going to be put in prison or home detention or whatever other punishment they must serve, there should be, in parallel, addressing the causes of offending. I forget the exact number, but I'm sure it was well over 50% of people in prison have serious mental health issues. Prison does not address mental health issues. You know.
Yeah. If
So
anything, it
look,
makes it worse, right?
yeah, sure.
Anyway,
Anyway,
we can do a full circle back to, so what you're saying is we need to tax wealth so that we can fund rehabilitation services and prevent crime, right?
we absolutely need a better tax system which is fairer and more equal and gives us the money we need to build the society we want.
Well,
How
we
about
can't wait to see what your tax plan is, Labour.
Very diplomatic. I love it.
No, it's been awesome to have you on. Thank you so much for spending your Friday night with us, and good work on the Treaty Principles Bill work in the Select Committee. And yeah, we'll hopefully hear from you soon.
Yeah. Have a good weekend. Have a good
Yes,
rest.
enjoy.
Yeah,
Catch
thanks.
ya.
Well, bye-bye.